Ralph Waldo Emerson, often called the father of transcendentalism, was born in Boston in 1803. Orphaned young, he worked his way through Harvard and first became a minister, but after the death of his wife, he left the pulpit, searching for a new truth beyond traditional religion. What he found became a uniquely American philosophy, built on independence, spirituality, and nature, and the power of the individual mind. In 1836, Emerson published his landmark essay, Nature, where he argued that the divine could be experienced directly in forests, fields, rivers, not just in churches. A year later, in his speech, The American Scholar, he called on Americans to trust themselves instead of imitating Europe. That single speech was described as America's intellectual declaration of independence. Emerson emphasized self-reliance, writing that every person carried a spark of genius within. His lectures drew crowds of thousands at a time when such gatherings were rare, and his earnings made him one of the first philosophers to actually support himself by ideas alone. His influence spread far beyond his lifetime. He inspired Henry David Thoreau, whose activism shaped Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Today, Emerson's call to live authentically, seek truth in nature, and resist conformity continues to define what many people see as the American spirit itself.
Henry David Thoreau, born in Concord, Massachusetts in 1817 into a small town that would become the stage for his radical ideas. A protege and friend of Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thoreau absorbed transcendentalist thought, but gave it a sharp edge. Life should be simple, honest, and lived close to nature. In 1845, he built a small one-room cabin at Walden Pond and spent 2 years there, recording his experiment in self-sufficiency. The result was Walden, still one of the most influential works of American philosophy. Thoreau believed stripping life to the basics revealed deeper truths about freedom and purpose. But his boldest idea came in 1849 in the essay Civil Disobedience. After refusing to pay a poll tax that supported slavery and the Mexican-American War, Thoreau spent a night in jail. Out of that came the principle that citizens must peacefully resist unjust laws. His ideas echoed across continents. Gandhi shaped his nonviolent resistance in South Africa and India from Thoreau's words. Martin Luther King Jr. repeatedly cited him in the fight for civil rights. Thoreau lived just 44 years, but his voice, calling for conscience above conformity and for harmony with the natural world, remains a rallying cry for activists, environmentalists, and dreamers everywhere.
William James. Born in New York City in 1842, grew up in one of America's most remarkable families. His brother Henry became a famous novelist, but William chose philosophy and psychology. He would soon be called the father of American psychology. Educated in medicine at Harvard, James became fascinated with the mind, how we think, believe, and act. His lectures were so groundbreaking that in 1876, Harvard established its first psychology course under him. But James was never just a scientist. He blended philosophy with lived experience. In 1890, he published The Principles of Psychology, a 1,200-page book that set the foundation for psychology as a science. He explored habits, free will, and consciousness in ways still cited today. As a philosopher, James created pragmatism, the idea that truth is not abstract, but proven by what works in life. He also advanced radical empiricism, insisting that experience, not theory, should guide understanding. James studied the psychology of religion, investigating conversion, prayer, and mystical states with an open mind. Rather than dismiss faith, he examined how it transformed lives. His influence is enormous. Psychology, education, philosophy, and even self-help movements all draw on him. More than a century later, William James's message stands. Truth lives in practice, not in dry theory, and the mind is our greatest frontier.
Charles Sanders Peirce, born in 1839 in Massachusetts, is often called the American Aristotle. Brilliant yet eccentric, Peirce mastered mathematics, physics, and philosophy, but struggled in academic life due to an abrasive personality. Still, his ideas changed how we think about truth and knowledge. Peirce was the first great logician in America, developing systems more advanced than most of Europe at the time. He founded semiotics, the study of signs and symbols, showing how all human communication works through representation and meaning. His most lasting contribution was to pragmatism, the view that ideas must be judged by practical consequences, not just theory. Later thinkers like William James and John Dewey built on foundations Peirce had already laid. While he published little in his lifetime and died in poverty in 1914, his manuscripts were rediscovered after his death and stunned scholars. Today, Peirce is ranked among the greatest philosophers of science, influencing logic, linguistics, even computer theory. Despite personal struggles, Peirce left behind a framework for how humans interpret the world. Truth is what works, signs shape meaning, and logic guides discovery. That vision continues shaping philosophy, mathematics, and communication studies worldwide.
John Dewey, born in Vermont in 1859, became one of the most influential philosophers in American history. A leading pragmatist, he believed philosophy should solve real problems of living, not just abstract puzzles. Dewey focused especially on education. He argued that schools should function like miniature democracies, where children learn through experience, discussion, and problem solving, not just memorization. At his laboratory school at the University of Chicago, he tested progressive methods that are now standard worldwide: group projects, hands-on learning, and attention to each child's growth. But his ideas extended beyond schools. Dewey saw democracy as a way of life, a living process of communication and collective problem-solving. This meant philosophy itself had to connect with ordinary citizens, advancing freedom, science, and participation. His influence reshaped teaching in America and beyond, inspiring reforms across the 20th century. Critics sometimes claimed his ideas encouraged aimless, child-centered schools, but his deeper legacy was empowering students to think critically and work together. By the time of his death in 1952, Dewey was recognized worldwide as a symbol of democratic philosophy. Today, his work guides not just education, but debates on civic life, showing that democracy isn't only in constitutions, it's in classrooms and communities, lived daily.
Josiah Royce, born in California in 1855, was a rare voice in philosophy. While many Americans embraced pragmatism, Royce defended idealism, the belief that reality is shaped by ideas and purpose. He sought to give America its own answer to the grand European systems of Hegel and Kant. At Harvard, where he taught alongside William James, Royce became known as the philosopher of community and loyalty. He argued that the deepest human virtue is loyalty to causes greater than oneself. Through loyalty, individuals find meaning and connect to an absolute community, a spiritual unity that transcends divisions. Royce also addressed ethics, religion, and the problem of evil, insisting that suffering could be integrated into growth through communal spirit. His philosophy of loyalty outlined this vision, contrasting with the rugged individualism more common in American thought. Though overshadowed in his own era by James and Dewey, Royce offered a distinct voice. Personal ideals and shared commitment hold societies together, not just laws or utility. Today, scholars revisit Royce as a thinker who anticipated modern discussions about identity, community, and belonging. His belief that true freedom requires loyalty and shared purpose reminds us that individual lives are always woven into larger human stories.
George Santayana, born in Spain in 1863 but raised and educated in Boston, was both philosopher and poet. Fluent in English, Spanish, and philosophy's classical languages, he became known for his elegant style, rare in academic circles. Santayana taught at Harvard until 1912, but he spent most of his life abroad, writing with a skeptical, worldly outlook. He combined materialism, the belief that matter is the basis of all reality, with a deep love for beauty and art, creating an aesthetic philosophy that saw art, religion, and imagination as essential for human life, even if they weren't literally true. He distrusted idealism and easy optimism, insisting that wisdom required facing life's limits, death, decay, and human folly. In this realist spirit, he wrote the famous warning, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Though he influenced students like T.S. Eliot and Wallace Stevens, Santayana never sought the spotlight, quietly producing over 20 books, blending philosophy, poetry, and cultural criticism. By the time of his death in 1952, Santayana was remembered as a philosopher who spoke with literary grace, equally at home in poetry and logic. Today he stands as a voice of elegant skepticism, reminding us to embrace beauty, remember history, and remain clear-eyed about life's limits.
Alain LeRoy Locke, born in Philadelphia in 1885, became the father of the Harlem Renaissance, but he was also one of the first African Americans to earn a Rhodes Scholarship. After studying at Harvard and Oxford, Locke completed a PhD in philosophy at Harvard and dedicated his life to showing how culture shapes identity. Locke believed in cultural pluralism, that every community, especially African Americans, has unique value to contribute to the larger society. He rejected the idea of assimilation and argued that diversity should be celebrated. His 1925 anthology, The New Negro, became a landmark, gathering African American artists, writers. Alain LeRoy Locke, born in Philadelphia in 1885, became the father of the Harlem Renaissance, but he was also one of the first African Americans to earn a Rhodes Scholarship. After studying at Harvard and Oxford, Locke completed a PhD in philosophy at Harvard and dedicated his life to showing how culture shapes identity. Locke believed in cultural pluralism, that every community, especially African Americans, has a unique value to contribute to the larger society. He rejected the idea of assimilation and argued that diversity should be celebrated. His 1925 anthology, The New Negro, became a landmark, gathering African American artists, writers, and thinkers into a single movement of creative pride. As a philosopher, he applied pragmatism to cultural life, focusing less on abstract systems and more on how art, literature, and music could transform how people understood race and democracy. Locke's influence helped launch figures like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Duke Ellington onto the national stage. His work showed that African American culture was not just survival, but an engine of creativity that reshaped America. When he died in 1954, Locke left behind not only books, but a cultural awakening. Today, his call for pluralism and dignity continues to inspire debates about identity, diversity, and the meaning of democracy.
John Rawls, born in Baltimore in 1921, reshaped modern political philosophy. After serving in World War II, Rawls pursued philosophy at Princeton and later taught at Harvard, where he developed ideas that would redefine debates about justice and fairness. In 1971, he published his masterpiece, A Theory of Justice. At its core is the famous thought experiment. Imagine designing society from a veil of ignorance, where you don't know whether you'll be rich or poor, strong or weak. From that perspective, people would create fairer rules to protect everyone, not just the lucky few. Rawls defined justice as fairness, basic equal rights, equal opportunities, and structures ensuring that inequalities benefit the least advantaged. His principles became cornerstones in liberal thought, influencing law, policy, and global debates worldwide. Whenever people ask, what does a fair society look like, they are, knowingly or not, echoing Rawls's vision.
Robert Nozick, born in 1938 in Brooklyn, New York, became one of the most forceful defenders of libertarian philosophy in the 20th century. Educated at Columbia, Princeton, and later teaching at Harvard, he rose to fame with his 1974 book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia. Nozick's argument was bold. Government should be minimal, existing only to protect individual rights against force, theft, and fraud. Any effort by the state to redistribute wealth or enforce equality, he claimed, was equivalent to coercion. For Nozick, taking someone's earnings to give to another person was morally comparable to taking hours of their labor without consent. He illustrated his view with the famous Wilt Chamberlain example. If people freely choose to pay a basketball star, inequalities naturally follow. That, he argued, is not injustice, it is freedom in action. Though critics said his framework ignored social obligations, Anarchy, State, and Utopia quickly became a classic, reshaping U.S. conservative and libertarian thought. Alongside John Rawls, Nozick stood as the great sparring partner in late 20th century debates about justice. By the time of his death in 2002, Nozick's influence reached economics, law, and politics. Even if one rejects his conclusions, his powerful defense of liberty ensures he remains a central voice in any discussion of the limits of government.
Richard Rorty, born in New York in 1931, was one of the most provocative American philosophers of the late 20th century. Trained in analytic philosophy, he eventually broke with its obsession over logic and foundations, instead reviving pragmatism in a fresh, postmodern form. Rorty's best-known work, Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, 1979, rejected the idea that philosophy's job was to mirror objective reality. He argued there are no final foundations for truth. Knowledge is not about matching words to the world, but about creating youthful vocabularies for coping with life. This stance, known as neo-pragmatism, was deeply controversial. To some, Rorty sounded like a relativist who denied truth itself, but his defenders said he was democratizing philosophy, freeing it from the ivory tower. Rorty also engaged politics, siding with liberal democracy not because it was absolute truth, but because it was the most practical system for human flourishing. His ideas bridged academic philosophy with cultural debates about pluralism, tolerance, and the role of intellectuals. When he died in 2007, Rorty left an unfinished but powerful legacy that philosophy should help societies grow more humane rather than chase timeless certainties. He remains a touchstone for debates over truth and democracy in a fragmented world.
Cornel West, born in Tulsa in 1953 and raised in Sacramento, is one of America's most recognizable public philosophers. A product of both Harvard and Princeton, West combined rigorous scholarship with fiery street-level activism. At the heart of his work is a focus on race, justice, and democracy. His landmark book, Race Matters, 1993, tackled issues of Black identity, poverty, and moral crisis in America with both scholarly insight and prophetic passion. Drawing from the Black church, Marxist social critique, and traditions of jazz and blues, West calls himself a Christian leftist who fights for love and justice against despair. Beyond academia, West brought philosophy to television, music, and the protest line. His collaborations with hip-hop artists and frequent appearances in public debate made him a cultural figure far beyond university walls. Critics sometimes dismiss him as theatrical, but admirers see him as carrying forward the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., blending moral urgency with democratic vision. Today, Cornel West continues to teach, write, and campaign on issues of inequality and social justice. His career embodies the idea that philosophy is not just theory, it is a weapon for dignity, truth-telling, and building democracy from the ground up.
Judith Butler, born in 1956 in Cleveland, transformed global debates on gender, sexuality, and power. After studies at Yale and teaching posts across the U.S. and Europe, Butler rose to prominence with the 1990 classic Gender Trouble. In that book, Butler introduced the idea of gender performativity, the notion that gender is not a fixed essence, but is performed through repeated actions, language, and social norms. This challenged traditional feminist and queer theory by arguing that gender categories themselves are socially constructed and open to change. Butler's ideas reverberated far beyond philosophy departments. They shaped LGBTQ+ activism, critical theory, and modern cultural debates about identity and rights across the world. To supporters, Butler offered liberation against rigid roles. To critics, the theories undermined stable identities or common-sense truths. Over the years, Butler has also written on ethics, democracy, violence, and precarious life, often linking personal vulnerability to global struggles for justice. They continue to speak out for human rights and against authoritarianism. Today, Butler stands as one of the most cited living philosophers. Whether loved or criticized, their work ensures that no modern discussion of sex, gender, or identity can proceed without confronting the question, Is who we are something we perform or something innate? Martha Nussbaum, born in 1947 in New York City, is one of the most influential living philosophers. Trained in classics at Harvard and later teaching at Chicago, Nussbaum bridges ethics, political theory, and human rights with a rare clarity that reaches beyond academia. Her most famous contribution is the capabilities approach, developed with economist Amartya Sen. Instead of measuring progress by wealth alone, Nussbaum asks, what are people actually able to do and be? Can they live with dignity, get an education, form relationships, participate in society? This framework is now used worldwide by the United Nations, governments, and NGOs to assess human development. Nussbaum has also written powerfully on feminism, disability, and emotions like compassion, anger, and disgust, showing how they shape law and justice. She argues that a truly just society must secure core capabilities for every person, recognizing our shared vulnerabilities. Her influence reaches classrooms, courtrooms, and policy circles alike. Awards from across the globe testify to her standing as not only a philosopher, but a global humanitarian thinker. Today, Nussbaum remains a public voice for justice and equality. Her work insists that philosophy isn't abstract. It's a blueprint for building societies where every human being can flourish.
Daniel Dennett, born in 1942 in Boston, became one of America's most provocative voices in the philosophy of mind. A student of Gilbert Ryle at Oxford, Dennett fused philosophy with cutting-edge science, earning a reputation as a cognitive philosopher who challenged how we think about free will, consciousness, and belief. His groundbreaking book, Consciousness Explained, 1991, argued that consciousness isn't a single magic process, but a set of parallel operations in the brain. He called this the multiple drafts model, seeing the mind as a narrative machine. His ideas influenced neuroscience, psychology, and artificial intelligence. Dennett also defended a naturalistic account of free will, not mystical freedom, but the kind compatible with evolution in science. He was a fierce critic of traditional religion, standing alongside Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens as one of the new atheists. Yet Dennett's tone was often calmer, urging reasoned debate rather than confrontation. Through books like Darwin's Dangerous Idea, Breaking the Spell, and countless public lectures, Dennett challenged millions to consider how evolution and the brain shape who we are. When he passed away in 2024, he left behind not only landmark scholarship, but also a legacy of making philosophy engage directly with science. Dennett's message endures. To understand ourselves, we must study the mind as part of the natural world.